This is Act 2, Scene 4, Part 1 analysis. We're on page 28 in our Paper 2 notebook, and we're going to go through. And again, I won't spend a huge amount of time on this. I think I want to maybe be a little bit more brief in some of these videos. But this is one of the 3 core scenes in the play, as I've discussed in other videos. Act 1, Scene 1 is the exposition. So the drama of the play is set up in Act 1, Scene 1. Act 5, Scene 3 is the resolution. So we find out, what happens to everybody at the end of the play in Act 5, Scene 3. And Act 4, Scene 2 is the climax scene, as I mentioned in the What Matters in Act 2 video. And the climax scene is the turning point. And it's a turning point in terms of the drama, yes, but it's also a turning point in terms of our perception of the characters. It's the moment when we begin to really view Lear in a more sympathetic way. But it's also a moment when we start to view Goneril and Regan in a less sympathetic way. This is the scene in which Lear is confronted by the consequences of his abdication, of his vanity, of his hubris, and is forced to face the truth of his daughter's contempt for him. Again, as usual, you read the little summary, you have it in your book, and we go through the quotes. So, when Lear arrives at Gloucester's castle, he finds Kent in the stocks. And his reaction is one of incredulity. He is incredulous. Which means he can't believe what he's seeing. And again, because he's blinded by his belief that nobody would deliberately insult him. He says, they durst not do it. They could not, would not do it. 'Tis worse than murder to do upon respect such violent outrage. I love the repetition. And I love the hyperbole. They durst not, could not, would not. Durst means dare. He still believes that nobody would dare to insult him. He's given away his power. He has no power. He hasn't gripped or grasped that yet. I think would not is really interesting because he's saying they love me. They love me. Why would they? Nobody would do this to me. I'm their dad. He doesn't get that they resent him for all those years of bullying and all those years of unreasonable behaviour and demands. And then, of course, it's worse than murder to insult him. That's Shakespeare deliberately using exaggeration. That's called hyperbole. Because he wants us to understand Lear's vanity hasn't faded here. He is suffering, and our perception of him is changing, but he's still the most self-important, hubristic, vain, arrogant, pompous man. And he thinks that, insulting him is worse than killing somebody else. So, lovely, lovely quote. We'll just give it a little mark because I think it is worth considering to learn. His suffering becomes more and more and more evident as this scene goes on. And what I mean by that is his psychological, his emotional, his mental suffering. And he can feel it. And in a great moment he says, how this mother swells toward my heart. Hysterica passio, down thy climbing sorrow. I'm not sure it's a quote I would necessarily learn, but it's certainly worth thinking about, particularly this idea of hysterica passio, passionate hysteria, the loss of the rational mind, the breakdown of reason and logic, the descent into madness. He can feel it coming. He's cracking up, to use the colloquial phrase, he's cracking up. I mean, he says, down thy climbing sorrow. He's trying to keep control, but he's struggling, and that struggle makes him sympathetic. Watching him and seeing him, hearing him struggle like this, watching him, receive all these blows. And yes, of course, this is of his own making, but that doesn't mean that we can't also feel some sympathy for him and empathy with him. One of my favourite quotes from the whole play is spoken by the fool in this scene. It is a top 10 learn the quote from the play quote. It is a brilliant metaphor, and it indicates the fool's intelligence and wit, but is couched as usual in his kind of cryptic imagery. He tells Kent, when he sees Kent in the stocks, he says, "You're some tick for choosing to serve him. Let go thy hold when a great wheel runs down a hill, lest it break your neck with following it." What does he mean? He means that Lear is out of control. He's heading for disaster. And anybody who stays loyal to Lear is going to be crushed, is going to be caught in the backdraft of that disaster. Is the fool correct? Yes, he is. Is he being dismissive of Lear? Well, no, because the fool never abandons Lear. So while the fool knows that Lear is heading for disaster, there's a tragedy in those words. There's a sadness, a pathos in those words. He's telling Kent, you better get out of here, because anybody who stays loyal to this guy is going to suffer. So it's a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant example of Shakespeare's use of figurative language. And it captures so much about the fool's character, but also the reality of Lear's situation at this moment. Things are out of control now. He's spiraling. He's like a great wheel running down a hill. It's going to crash. When he arrives at Gloucester's castle and he wants to speak to to Cornwall and to Regan, they send a message saying, "Oh, we've been travelling, we're tired." And Lear's reaction is again incredulity and fury. "Denied to speak with me. They are sick. They are weary. They have travelled hard tonight. Mere fetches. The images and revolt of taking off." It's a brilliant, again, all of this is fantastic. But look, 1, 2, 3 exclamation marks. He's incredulous. He cannot believe that anybody would not obey his summons. He cannot believe that Regan, when he says, "Attend me," says no. Now, of course, this is an indication of the power shift that he himself has created. Regan is under no obligation anymore to obey his instructions. But he's blind to that. He still thinks that even though he's given up his power as king, he's her father, and she's bound by the natural laws to obey him because he's her father. She feels no obligation to him as his daughter. And the act of refusing his summons is an act which he is correct in saying is designed to show that she is not willing to obey him anymore. Now, he calls that a revolt, but it's not a revolt. He handed over power. And his inability to cope with it is fascinating to watch, frustrating in many ways, but also because we know he's struggling, psychologically, mentally, our sympathy for him is growing. The scene is punctuated with these lovely moments of reflection. It's like he's in the gym and he's busting his ass, and then he's taking a breath, and in those moments of reflection he's thinking, and he says that, I think this is lovely, "We are not ourselves when nature, being oppressed, commands the mind to suffer with the body." And of course that is really one of the core messages of this play, that suffering is a part of the life experience, but suffering is not merely a physical phenomenon. Suffering is exacerbated, made worse when it's psychological and when it's mental. This is a play about, the struggle to cope with the tragedies and to quote another Shakespeare play, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. The thing with Lear is that it's not fortune that causes him all the suffering. It's his own doing. It was his fatal flaw. It was his vanity, his belief that he could do something like abdicate and then retain power. This is what's caused all this chaos. When Regan eventually shows up, he doesn't chastise her the way you might have expected him to, seeing how he behaved towards Kent and Goneril and Cordelia in previous scenes. Instead, he says, "Beloved Regan, thy sister's not. Now again, that's thy sister's not, I think, is interesting. He's saying, she's nothing to me. It's like saying about Cordelia, my sometime daughter. She's dead to me. He's talking about Goneril. But look at the word he uses when he addresses Regan. Beloved. He doesn't say, how dare you? I summoned you. Why did you not come? Because now he's desperate. Now he's doing that thing that she did to him in Act 1, Scene 1. He's flattering her because he's trying to influence her. But she's deaf to his flattery because this is her opportunity. She's been waiting her whole life for this moment where she can assert her power over him. She tells him, I cannot think my sister in the least would fail her obligations. If, sir, perchance she has restrained the riots of your followers, 'tis on such ground, and to such wholesome end as clears her from all blame. And it is just one of those really, really, open your mouth in awe moments. Like you can hear a pin drop in the theatre. Because what she's saying in the most calm, controlled, almost nonchalant, uncaring tone is, Daddy, you're wrong. There's no sense of her being frightened of him here. To tell Lear he was wrong in the past would be to put yourself in danger, in peril. But now, she tells him, Dad, you're wrong. I'm sure Goneril acted perfectly reasonably, and this is your fault. Now, this is a key moment. It's a key moment where she is asserting her authority over him and demonstrating to him that he is no longer able to intimidate her. And this then leads to that great confrontation when she demonstrates her contempt for him after Goneril arrives and the two sisters hold hands in a great symbolic indication for Lear of the fact that he is now alone in the world, certainly when it comes to his family. We'll deal with the rest of this scene in part 2 of the analysis.